Welcome back to the show. We are excited to interview David Riggs, founder of Pneuma Media, a full-service web development, SEO, and advertising agency. Incredibly, at just 25 years old, David has more experience as an entrepreneur than really most people have in a lifetime. He started his first company at 16, and over the last 2 years, he's not only built Pneuma Media into a $3 million ARR business, but he's founded Pneuma Ventures, a capital arm that invests in early stage companies. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man. I like the intro as well.
Thanks a lot for coming on, Dave.
Yeah. So, the first thing, you're so young, David. I mean, we've talked about this offline. I'm wondering, where did you get this initial entrepreneurial bug and desire to just, where did that start?
16 is probably when the first real agency started, I'd say. But my parents, if you ask them, would probably go all the way back to it's probably elementary school, 4th, 5th grade. We lived in Kentucky. We lived right on a golf course. And during summers, I didn't have really anything else to do. This was before iPads. This was before phones, even for that kid. Like you went outside, you got dirty, you ate some dirt, and you came back inside. That was summer days, right? So living next to a golf course, I got the creative idea because I saw a yard sale the year before to go grab golf balls. At the time, I realized that it was stealing. I didn't really know it then, but the golf course that we lived on did not have good golfers. So say once or twice a day, you'd hear a thud on the house, and it was somebody hitting our house because we were right off the first tee. And I would run out, snag it, put it in a bucket in the garage, and then run back in and would wait for the next one. And I did that summer after summer after summer. And then would turn around and sell them at the yard sale. And the one time that I got caught, it's because one guy had his like initials or like a signature on the golf ball. And I sold him the same golf ball that he hit in the yard. He was like, I think I lost it in this yard. Like, did you find it? And I was like, I guess, I obviously knew what I was doing. And he went through the full bucket and found like another 15. So I don't know if that says worse about me or worse about his golfing ability, but jokes aside, it started there in the sense of, I think grew up with the right parents, but at the right time to have the freedom to just do things and figure things out and have fun with it. So after golf balls, it was shoes. I think at one point in high school, I had $4,000 or $5,000 worth of shoes for whatever reason. I was working, buying, and then essentially flipping it. It's not really something you can do anymore for plenty of reasons, but I was making friends with people at Foot Locker. I was making friends with people at Nike, and they would text me like, hey, we got 30 pairs of the new 11s. Like you got your name on them if you want it. So we would find people to deal shoes to us, and I'd turn around and sell them for 30, 40, 50% markup. So did that for a while as well. Sold all of my shoes at some point. I think I had close to 80 pairs at the peak. It was completely useless. But my stories up until Pneuma comprised of a lot of just figuring stuff out, having fun with it. Even on college campus, I was toying, and I got turned down by the college. But I really wanted to create just like our campus's version of Uber, and especially Uber Eats, because I went to a small college town. They did not have Uber. They did not have Lyft. But I knew that everybody going out drinking on a Friday night, Friday to like 11, they want food. So I was like, I'm happy. Like I'll drive around. So I even did it a while, like in my own car, and tried to make it a thing and got turned down. But it was just a lot of just finding opportunity, whether it literally hit the house or hit me on the head, all the way out to just seeing what people wanted and trying to solve for it. During college, I thought finance was going to be my route, especially with the classes I was taking, the internships that I had, in many ways in another world, that's probably the path I'm on, but it never really sat right with me. It always felt different than what I wanted to do. And that led me all the way to Pneuma today, accidentally building a website for somebody. And that was the first one of many. So
got to hear about that accident.
Yeah. So the accident was, I didn't even realize I was getting into a website build. So it was a good friend of mine. His name was Will. That time I was running TEDx events, if you guys have heard of them. I was the one organizing everything, and all of our speakers, pretty much every other speaker that we had at that event that year, were pretty notable, but they all had their own personal brand websites. And Will, he was actually a year older than me, but had a pretty cool story. He'd already beaten leukemia twice. So we were interviewing him as like just a cool, local success story, but also just a really cool story in general. He was like, hey, I don't have any information about myself. He was like, I want to apply for these other speaking events, and they keep asking for portfolios. Like, do you know what they're asking for? And I was like, I don't know. Let me go ask one of the other speakers. And I asked all of them. They're like, oh, just, figure out like a website or a PDF. And I was like, well, a website sounds fun. And I remember I definitely took a hit on my grades because it was finals week when we were doing this. And it was like my last final Thursday, the finals Friday morning. And I was like, I either need to study for this or I need to build Will a website. And I stayed up until like 3 building him a website. It might still be active today, honestly. I'm not sure, but that was what got into it. And then I was like, that wasn't all that difficult. And I'm pretty sure I Googled how much are websites, how much will people pay for websites, trying to figure out something along the lines of that. And essentially, at this point, it was such a crude way to do it. But I pulled down a list of every local business in the Crawfordsville area where I went to college.
That was Wabash.
That was Wabash, yeah. Pulled down a list of everybody in that area, cold emailed them from my Wabash email. Again, a crude way to do it. And ended up getting like 2 or 3 leads that wanted websites. And ever since then, it was just that essential repetitive project. I was finding stuff, fulfilling it. Obviously, I have people underneath me now, but I never started with a lot of web skills. I used a very basic builder whenever we started. So I'm not a developer. I don't know code, but I definitely came from it as there is a problem that I think we can solve. And if I can be the person to put the team together to solve it, I'll probably do pretty well. So it came into that standpoint. And that's really the way we look at business today is if we have an in with the client, let's say we started to build their websites. Pneuma today is primarily an SEO agency, right? We built the websites and the next thing everybody asked for was SEO. So we added SEO line and down the line, a year later, everybody was asking for hosting. So we added that. So we've really kept that same initial value prop of just like, how can we solve a problem for you? Solved it and then asked you, okay, what other problems do you have as well? And we've talked about this before, even outside of the podcast. Client service is all about just making friends and making those real relationships because they'll come back to you for all sorts of stuff afterwards.
So if I look back, you built your businesses, right? Even from taking those golf balls and reselling them, it was based on a need first, right? Before you got into the numbers. So were you, as you grew and as it evolved into Pneuma, at what point did it go from need to, all right, I really got to understand the numbers?
Yeah, I would say I remember crossing the $1 million ARR threshold. So it was 83,000 a month. I didn't even know we were going to build that. Honestly, I was just having fun right out of college, seeing what we could put together, honestly. And I remember looking at books and we had actually crossed it 3 months earlier and I had no idea. And that's when I was like, okay, there's a lot of people that never make it to 1 million. And I just did it while having fun, not even knowing that we made it to $1 million run rate. Like, let's take this a little more seriously and get into the weeds of things. So that's when I pulled out some of the finance knowledge and actually looked at my first P&L ever for the business just to see what we were doing, where money was going. And I think that definitely sparked something in me to see my goal with starting Pneuma, because I was coming from a W-2 job, was to make enough money to survive. And I kept making enough money to survive all the way to that $1 million a year mark and really never thought differently about it. I just thought I was making money and that was it. And once I pulled that P&L down and actually looked at it, I realized, one, the business itself has some value now. It's more than just David. It's David and others. It's a full team, a full brand. But looking at that and starting to realize that, we didn't do anything all that special. We just showed up, put in kind of what we always still call as like input actions, treat clients nice, prospect daily. There's not much to it for us, at least. And it got us to that point. Got me really interested to say, okay, what happens if we put some strategy, some tactics, and some real effort behind it? And I think that's when my own personal journey shifted a lot from, I'd say, knowing how to spin up something and make some money off the back of it to actually owning a business, running a business, managing a team, and really put me on a path of using some of that finance knowledge I had, but diving even deeper into the true business side of like, I didn't even know what to call the business we had. Like that's probably when I learned the word agency and marketing agency and service-based business. To me, before it was just, I build your websites. That was about it.
Hey, Dave, let me bounce something on here. So there's SEO and website ad nauseum, right? I mean, you get hit up by that stuff all the time. You and I have an interesting story about how we connected on that. But what, in such a short amount of time, tell us about how you differentiate from every other Tom, Dick, and Harry that's providing SEO. And, it's remarkable to go to $1 million and $3 million a year in revenue in 2 years is incredible. Let's dive into kind of the scaling. I know you outsource a lot, and take us through that and how you built it from sort of this project-based single individual to, pretty burgeoning company.
Yeah, totally. But I think the first thing I'd say too, you're right. People get hit up for websites all the time, right? I think our average website cost now is 10 to 15 grand, maybe even a little higher, probably closer to 20. And our average SEO contracts per year can be anywhere from 30 to 50 to $60,000, probably even a little higher than that as well. But you are far-fetched to find somebody who's not on LinkedIn that hasn't been pitched that stuff for $100, right? So one of the biggest differences that I think we really brought into the equation for us is that my background, again, is not in design. It's not in marketing. It's not in website. It's not in anything similar to that. I just like solving problems. So a lot of the other times when you go work with a design agency, a marketing agency, they build stuff that looks cool. And we've kind of villainized that, I'd say, to our benefit as we market, ultimately because they will build stuff that looks cool. We all like it, and it does absolutely nothing. And that's the age-old agency problem, that they don't really know what works, but that's not their incentive when you pay them. So I'd say this is where my background in finance actually helps a lot with the marketing side of things. From day one, we tracked essentially on every single site what pages we had, what buttons were there, what colors we used, what language we used, why we structured the site that way, how we did our parent and child pages, how we maybe didn't do our parent and child pages, where did we put the social proof. We got really in depth and tracked everything. So I think the biggest benefit today, and why, honestly, we could probably charge another 30, 40% more, is that when you buy into us and invest in us to get you a website, you're not just getting a website, you're getting the learnings from the other 200 websites that we've built. And I'd say ultimately that's the biggest game changer, because you'll see a lot of times with these other agencies, they just don't, they always recreate the wheel. They always think that something new needs to be done. And every single time they start from zero. So I'd say that's the biggest differentiator in what we've done, is that in the nicest way possible, I'm lazy. I don't want to recreate the wheel every single time and do a different strategy. I want to find something that works and run that play again and again and again. A mentor of mine who is a Patriots fan, he gave me the analogy that
smart guy, by the way.
I'm a Colts fan. I'm a Peyton Manning guy, but he used the analogy of Bill Belichick and Tom Brady, and said, "Hey, do you think they come up with a new playbook every year?" The answer is obviously no. Especially after they won a Super Bowl, they might tweak some things, but they're running that same playbook again and again and again and again. And he said a lot of people in business, when they win a Super Bowl, they'll try a new playbook, because they get so confident that they got one playbook down that they need to switch it up. And I think that has always stuck with me, because, and Pat knows this as well, we have worked together for closing on 2 years now. Mm-hmm. Teams larger, the systems itself behind the scenes are not that much different. We might have swapped a tool out for a different tool, but it's the same core process that's worked from day one to day whatever it is today. So I'd say that's the biggest thing that we've really taken into it. And I think the biggest differentiator, that sure, you can spend $100, it's going to be a waste of money. But for a lot of our clients, if you're doing web and SEO, I think around the 12-month mark, it ends up being an 8 to 9x ROI. And we can point to that on paper. And that's with messy attribution. There's a strong argument to say it's probably higher.
That's pretty incredible. I mean, that's a good lesson, right? I think I've seen this in my career too, where people change the playbook, like you said, and they're going in a very strong direction, but something happens along the way, right? Either it's bad advice or greed takes over and they just go off course. So it's good that you surrounded yourself with good mentors. As you're scaling the business, as you're learning these things, were you seeking mentorship? If not, how did you find it? And how are you kind of learning and adjusting and not making critical mistakes that can put some companies out of business initially?
Yeah, it's a great question. For whatever people think of the platform, I still think LinkedIn is one of the best places to hang out. It's kind of cringy. It doesn't really feel like a social platform, but it's not necessarily a job platform anymore. It's kind of a confusing place. But when I was in college, I met somebody named Justin Rowe, who I would say is probably the first mentor of mine. He started and actually sold his agency now. But I downloaded LinkedIn because somebody at the college said I needed LinkedIn. Set up a profile, and about a week later, I logged back on of okay, what am I going to do with this thing? And Justin had just posted hey, for the first 100 people to comment on this post, I'll give free LinkedIn profile feedback. And I was like, oh, that's cool. What the heck? I'll sign up. I signed up and I still give him a lot of love for it. That changed a lot of me just getting out into the world and actually seeing that side of things. Mm-hmm. He gave me feedback and was like, hey, you're young. You should start now. There's no reason that's going to be a bad idea. So later that week, I essentially made a commitment to post at least every weekday. So 5 days a week on LinkedIn. And remind you, I was a sophomore in college. I had nothing of value to talk about other than my classes. If you really scroll all the way back, I am, I got in a little bit of trouble, but I'm calling out some professors, not by name, but talking about how professors need to set better expectations for grading. And I was living college life and talking about it on LinkedIn. Slowly but surely, I went from 10 likes a post, 20 likes a post, 50 likes a post. And way back when I was getting 100, 150, 200 when LinkedIn was really ripe for that stuff. And I was a college kid. What I ended up doing and how I found a lot of those mentors is I then just kind of documented in public, hey, I've been building websites. I think I'm going to name it Pneuma and we're going to build more websites. If you know anybody, let me know. That got us actually quite a few leads as well. But it got a lot of people of hey, you remind me of myself back in the day. Would love to connect and offer some learning lessons and things like that. So even off the top of my head, 2 or 3 of the people that I talk to the most about business, I've never met in person. One of them, I don't even know where he lives, to be quite frankly. We just trade DMs, trade texts, trade emails. And that's really where I got a lot of it. And, I always tell people, it's the advice that I would give myself again, but 10% of the people are going to take it. There's nothing wrong with getting out on LinkedIn or even a social platform, just talking about what you're doing and asking open-ended questions, because the people on the other side of the screen, and I learned this later on, if you're looking for a mentor, there are certain people that are looking to mentor you as well. Like that's kind of the career progression, I would say. And it was so easy for me to find people that were so readily available to invest in me just in their time and energy. And it gave me a really good, I'd say, not bulletproof path, but pretty darn close to it to get to the stage that I'm at today. So go ahead.
You're raising something that's so important. I think that's the personal brand element, and you've really mastered that. I mean, building a website development company to scale, given the competition and SEO, is incredible. So there's just things in your head that are kind of next level, given your age and all that. But talk a little bit about that personal branding element. I think that's sort of the lightning in the bottle that everybody's trying to capture, which is to get their message out authentically to a broader audience. And I know one of the things I always found very impressive about you is, in addition to the technical acumen in your team, building out pretty websites and that do cool things and all that, but the sales funnel and the way you utilize that through LinkedIn. And I think we could all use some advice around building that personal branding. You've become an expert. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, totally. I'm a big believer in it. There's you guys are familiar obviously with Warren Buffett, and Warren Buffett always talks about he wants to invest in companies that you could pay the consumer. I don't remember what number he uses, but $10,000 and they still wouldn't switch. So he references Apple quite a bit. I wouldn't pay $10,000. I'd keep, or I wouldn't take it. I'd probably still keep, my Apple device, right? That's when I started to realize that brand really was a big differentiator, because you can look across the board. Peter Thiel's another good example. In his book, 0 to 1, he talks about all these different moats that you can have in a business. And one of them is brand. He equally admits that he's like, I don't really know how to value brand or look at it, so I don't invest in that. I invest in technical moats and things like that. But if you really look at brands, something like Louis Vuitton, right? Their bags, in my opinion, aren't anything special. They actually produce less of them than most other brands today, which you could argue is probably they have less reps, which means they might not be as high of quality. And he can 10 to 12x the market just because of a pretty brand. So as I started to put those pieces together, I realized that, brand is essentially the easiest way to start owning real estate in everyone else's heads. I do search engine optimization now, but when an individual thinks of something, they're searching their brain, I need to pop up. I need to optimize myself for 2 or 3 certain things that whenever they think of it, they think of David. And that's really where I started with the website stuff. And there are so many messages in my LinkedIn that essentially said, our company needs a new website. I immediately thought of you. And that was one of the biggest long tail things that I have. And I always tell people, especially if you're a founder or any type of decision maker, if you have any ability there to do sales or drive revenue, posting content, I always tell people 3 times a week on LinkedIn and Twitter, just talk about what you're doing, because what's interesting to you or what's not interesting to you, it doesn't mean it's not going to be interesting to the market, right? The daily stuff that us 3 go through might be the exact thing somebody else needs to hear. So yeah, I really stumbled upon that. When Justin gave me the feedback for LinkedIn, I just wanted to post and do something. College was great. College and I didn't get along all the time just because it didn't feel right for me. So LinkedIn was an easy way to put some energy into. But building that brand now, I think it's one of the largest moats that you can have, especially in building a business today. I have about 25,000 followers on LinkedIn, about 10,000 on Twitter, another 5,000 to 6,000 on a newsletter. What is that? About 42,000 at any given time. If I want to launch a new business, I have 42,000 people that have essentially opted into hearing about me. Don't worry much about the leads or the sales side of things anymore because of that. But equally, I take care with a lot of my brand. If you were to go out and ask people, and I do this occasionally to make sure I'm still on track, but I don't think I'm really known as the hyped up kid who knows how to run businesses and make some money. I think people are actually, will give me a little bit of respect here and there about what I'm talking about and things like that. The other big value add that a lot of deals are now coming through me. So even if a team's doing an internal redesign and they don't want to use an agency, I'll still get messages. Hey, can you come consult? What's your consulting rate to at least give us some feedback on how we're doing this? So we're becoming part of the conversation because of that brand. And it's one of those things that, it's really hard to put a value on because I don't know how we'd be running a business without it. It's just one of those things that if we didn't have it, I don't think we have a business. And I think in today's day and age, Pat, all the way back to your example, the reason why people don't buy those $100 websites or $200 a month SEO campaigns from somebody in their DMs is because they don't know them. That person doesn't have a brand. They're not notable. But if I DM you, you're going to click into my profile and you're going to see a whole swath of industry expert knowledge and really founder-led knowledge on SEO, marketing, sales, branding. You're going to say, okay, this guy's actually legit. Like I should reach out and talk. And I think, Pat, that goes to your second comment of the sales funnel. Typically the old school way was to paywall everything. So agencies back in the day used the black box method and to say, hey, Pat and Brian, you guys are going to pay us $10,000 a month. Our strategy is hidden within this black box. I can't tell you what it is because it's unique to us, but it will work. Here are some client results. That's about all you got from a sales call, right? So you jumped on knowing you were going to get pitched. For us, I take the lid off that black box. I say, okay, guys, here's the black box. Here's everything that we do in the nicest way possible. I know you're not going to do it yourself. So I have no issue telling you my strategy. If you take it and use it, good for you. If you don't take it and you don't use it, I'm the obvious choice because I just told you everything. So we've ran with the same, what we call lead offer since day one, which is a free audit or free assessment. You can go into our website. If you're listening to this, even you can go on and book in a time. Either myself or somebody from the team will take 30 minutes and either break down your website or your SEO campaign and give you 5 things to do differently. If you want to follow up and set a second call, you can. If you want to take it and apply it yourself, you're welcome to do that as well. So I think it was enough of a change in where the market was headed. And that's really helped us because we've been known and have really come to be known as the people who are just there to help. We're the industry experts with web and SEO, but because we're approachable, because we open our doors like that, naturally a lot more people come through. And there's always a good story. There's some guy that booked in about 4 months ago. He had no money. He was not a high quality prospect, you would say. Most sales teams would DQ that in an instant with a budgetary requirement on the form and never talk. Ryan, ironically, not Brian, didn't have any money. About a month later, I get an email. Hey, I got somebody to refer to you. You cool if I do that? I'm like, yeah, totally. Refers us to a publicly traded company. It's his neighbor. A week later, Ryan's like, I got somebody else. They really liked you. Can I refer you again? Yeah, totally. Not publicly traded, but pretty darn big, 9 figures. We've gotten 4 people from them. So that's kind of the value of I take things with a grain of salt on the sales side as well, which I think makes us different. I think if you're actually out to help people, you actually have a strong motive of giving value and giving your expertise out. It's really hard to lose, but it's really hard not to have that second or third order consequence of more revenue and more leads coming through.
Good.
Sorry, Brian.
Yeah, I was just going to say on the sales aspect, because that's really interesting, right? It's every year. Pat, you've seen this in business. I've seen it in business. Obviously, David, you have as well. There's an evolution on the sales side, right? And I would argue back in the day, it was more of like cold calls. So you pick up a phone, you call someone, you got your elevator pitch, right? And then email gets included. And email was hot. Well, then email gets overutilized, right? And so you're thinking like, well, what's next? And it's interesting, your comments about how brand is really critical to the sales component as well, because your example of, hey, you get a message, a cold message on LinkedIn or anywhere else, probably just, a quick look at it and delete it, right? Because you don't know who the person is, or they're selling a product that you already have ties with at said company. So what's interesting to me is you work on the brand first. People are familiar with the name. Then you send that email and it's more impactful, right? So it's almost like the next evolution of where sales needs to go, right?
Yeah. And I always tell people this and nobody will listen because again, it's an effort thing, right? When you hire a salesperson today in SDR, they don't think of themselves as content marketers. They think of themselves as cold callers and cold emails. As blunt as this is, I will never hire somebody to just send cold emails and cold calls. We have an SDR in our team. He responds to everything. We have systems that will go out and automate all the email send. You can even automate a cold call now, which is as crazy as it seems. Some of those manual actions are disappearing. And that's where the person on the team I'm thinking of, Brandon, we're slowly turning Brandon into almost like a brand advocate. He's out there posting content that he's writing himself, repurposing from what we already have. He's building a little bit of that brand as well. He knows how to do sales. He knows how to close the deal, but all that upfront stuff a tool can do nowadays, we're jumping the gun a little bit and just getting to the point to where, I was in the market. I talked a lot about websites. People came to me and asked me questions. Those questions turned into revenue. Why don't we just have more people talk about websites and become the website guys, the SEO guys, or ultimately down the line, just the agency guys, right? And I think that's I think it's an obvious shift. I don't think many people have gone to that because the old school method is I'm going to get 10 guys in a room. They're all going to cold call and we're going to see how many leads we get. Well, leads equally, just because I answer my phone doesn't mean I'm interested. So there's a whole world where I think a good friend of mine, his name's Scott, talks about go to network. And I think it's a very good understanding that a lot of these sales teams, they're better off building networks, building relationships, and being advocates for the brands that they work for, and just being in the room when the conversations are being had, talk about value props, post about your opportunities and value props. Naturally, you will be a part of the conversation. But I think a lot of companies steer away from that because of the fancy thing of how do you measure it? How do you report that up? Hey, Greg has 15,000 LinkedIn followers. That doesn't mean anything to a board, but I'd hire somebody quicker if they have 15,000 connections in the industry because I know for a fact how to generate revenue off of that.
That's interesting. And I'll ask this last question, Pat, and have you jump in. But it's interesting that the role of the salesperson has also changed. I think that's a great observation. It used to be you're part of the company, you're dialing for dollars, that's what you do. Now it's more impactful if you create and work on your own brand, right? And then because now if you have the attention, it's easier to convey or pass along said message or said product or service. What are your thoughts? Social? Is it, there's this debate, quality over quantity. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, it's somewhere on my LinkedIn if you go all the way back. Quantity is the only thing that breeds quality. So I believe in both. But the point of that is that you'll see a lot of teams today that say, they almost hide behind it as an excuse. We only post once a week because we believe in quality. Yeah, whatever. Like that post took 5 minutes. You put it up. That's not quality. That's just you being lazy. I've been a big believer in that the only way you get to quality is by doing the quantity. So that's a big reason why a lot of times you can go out and pitch websites for way north of 6 figures. I know friends that have closed websites for $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 for like Target-esque brands, those style sites. I don't like that because you get low reps. So I'm a big believer even with us. I like the price point we're at because we get a lot of quantity and our product becomes the best in class. Same thing for a lot of the sales and the content and things like that. When you get down to the quality and quantity debate, I think the only way to enter the conversation is to just start doing. And there's a little side topic, but I'm sure we'll get into it. The business that we just acquired, we have no idea how we really want to market it long term. We have plenty of soft ideas, but I guess we're not sold on a single one. I spent all day yesterday just sending cold emails, cold messages, posting about it, just kind of like testing the marketing out. I have no idea what's going to stick, but in doing so, the other two guys with me were like, whoa, like, let's talk about this first. I'm fine to talk about it, but like, let's see what the market says. Just throw stuff at the wall and whatever sticks, we build quality around later. So, for whatever it's worth, it's probably not the perfect answer, but that's the way we've always seen it. That, I think people get too caught up in the quality and quantity debate. I think it's the same thing. One just comes after the other.
So Dave, one thing that has always impressed me about you, and I think that we all struggle with it, you've mastered far earlier than the rest of us, is that balance of personal touch, your own personal brand, but yet scaling the organization, right? And I know from my personal experiences, you developed the website that I currently have a couple of years ago. And what I really appreciated was your willingness to understand what the brand was all about and really kind of be that visionary to a degree and understand, process that and help orchestrate it. But at the same time, there's a lot of tasks. You're not a code guy per se. How do you kind of hit it on it? But to me, that's what differentiates you from everybody else. They might have the technical acumen, but they really don't know how to put your vision and build that sales funnel. What has been your personal belief and implementation of that in not just building cool sites and all that, but making this a 3 million and ARR company with a huge trajectory?
Yeah, I think, it goes back to, and I can't say too much, my first job I was working, there's a vendor that we worked with that, two vendors actually. One was fantastic. One was, it made me want to quit and start an agency, which I did. I'll just put it that way. One was terrible. And I noticed the one that was fantastic and the one that was terrible. The one that was terrible only wanted to talk about what they were doing. All about what they were doing. Hey, we completed A, B, C, D, E, and F. The one that was really, really good, I felt like we were always behind at the beginning. We were like a month behind. We didn't see any deliverables. Every single meeting, every single conversation was about goals in mind, what we wanted, how we wanted to do it. That project ended up finishing quicker, under budget, and was the project that we moved forward with. We didn't even use the other product that was created because it was so far behind schedule, so far over scope, and we didn't care. So there's two ways I always break this down. In a client services relationship, there is a brand at play, which is the agency or the brand that you're using. But, in a lot of worlds, I think a lot of companies, right, humans are always going to have to be a part of the agency. A lot of companies see that as the antithesis to scale. We can't have humans involved if we're going to need this to scale. Let's hide it behind a ticketing form, different forms, different email addresses, and let's just make it hard to figure out who the person is so we can slot whoever in. I went the other route and realized that there is no way to take a human out of a company. We got AI, we have GPT, things like that. You still need people in a company for, in my opinion, the foreseeable future. We just leaned in the other direction. And for every other, I hate to be the anti-agency guy because it's overplayed, but really most agencies were only concerned about how little they talk to clients, which cracked me up that like, these are the people paying you. You don't want to talk to them. So we flipped it on its head and we built a model to where, if you're hiring us, you're hired to almost be a little bit of a client therapist and a client hypnotist of like understanding what they want. Like our project manager strategist is like the job title that we have, but you are a client liaison. You sit in between the client and your own team that you represent. And I think that structure of realizing that there's no way you can take people out of the business. Instead of trying to hide behind it or minimize it, let's just maximize it. Let's go the other route and put people right in front of the clients, make it easy to talk to them because we use Slack for everything. Tell them when they can expect us, how they can expect us, where you're going to get your updates, like make us very approachable in that sense, but really make sure that people understand that we are a people first agency. Ironically, we've scaled quite quickly because of that. But I think it comes all the way back to that experience that I had with the two agencies. It was funny to watch because I thought we were behind. And then all of a sudden we had this picture perfect, pixel perfect product that met everything that we need. And I felt like we had our minds read because of all of those initial understanding sessions. So there's a lot that I can go in with that. But I really think it's just a decision that the founding team has to make. The DNA of a founder is going to be in every single company up to a certain point, especially at the size that we're at. It was a knowing decision that I was going to make sure that we are people first and that we're communication first over anything else. There's a really, really interesting study. I quote it all the time. I need to go find out what the brand actually was that did it. But they broke down reasons why people leave agencies. And you too, I guarantee you the first thought of mine would be results. Results was like fourth. The first, second, and third all went back to communication. How quickly you communicated, how quickly they got back, what were timelines, how was the project managed? I'm not saying that we don't care about results because we do, and we're very focused on it, and we know how good we are in that side of things. But you can ask anybody on my team, if there's something that I'm picky about, it's communication. If your client is at a 4X or a 5X ROI, there are conversations to be had to get them to 6X. But I care far more that you respond to them within 48 hours. You're matching their tone, you're matching their energy, you're meeting their, understanding, you're meeting them where they're at on their education level. So really, again, it might not be the perfect answer because it seems so simple, but in theory, whenever you actually carry it out, it's far more complex. It's really just part of the culture to set communication and really client handholding, not in a negative way first over anything else, because at the end of the day, it's a people to people business. You got to keep people happy and meet them where they're at.
So how do you scale then? If you take it from you, right? Single entrepreneur who then grows the business, you're making more hires. Do you at some point have to build out your own internal like operations manuals? Do you then try and focus on, all right, for these top 5, I'm going to train them. And when you train someone, we just had this conversation not too long ago, Pat, was, okay, even if I don't have a manual and I'm just training you, right, from everything up here, it might be different for each individual. And you want it to be consistent across the board. So what did you do the moment you started to scale to say, I have to take everything from the knowledge that's up here to convey it and pass it along to my team? How did you do it?
So back to finance, one of my favorite classes in high school, and this is going to show how weird I am, was calculus, AB calculus. It was their like the one that you can take in high school for college. I loved it. The one thing that's always stuck with me is formulas with different inputs and outputs. Whenever I worked at my one corporate job and a few corporate internships, there were no formulas. There were laws. If you broke a law, you were in trouble. That was it, right? I couldn't improve a system or a process if I thought it was better because it was against the law. We had to follow the law. You get a downward spiral of just chaos and, in my opinion, poor output whenever you build laws into a company. And I think a lot of times, and like you mentioned it, but I don't think this is where you're going with operating manuals. A lot of times people hear operating manuals and say, oh, like I have to do A, then B, then C, then D. If I don't like E, I still have to do it or else I'm fired. Like, might not be that intense, but that's, I think, the way a lot of people think companies are formed. And I've always pushed back against that. I build formulas. So formulas in my definition are structures to follow, but they are not hard and fast guidelines. So a formula for a web project, you're going to do a strategy call first, design second, copy third, development fourth. You're going to do QA and launch fifth. However, underneath those, they're just rough goals of guidelines of what you need to complete. There are some message templates, but there's not day 1, do this, day 2, do this. I don't want to, 1, I'm too lazy again to get that nit gritty with it. But 2, every client is different and every project manager is different. By doing a formula, you have places where you can input that project manager's personality, the client's personality, the client's needs and goals as well. It allows for enough flexibility to meet the client where they're at, one, but two, actually keep people happy and engaged at work where they can put their own pulse and idea and thought process on things without feeling so rigid that like you just have to abide by this or you're in trouble. So
you're allowing a little more creative freedom.
A little more creative freedom. But I think the other thing as well is that not every project's the same. They're 80% the same, which is the formula, but that 20% I actually actively encourage people to do inputs for. Find something new, find a creative way to do this, right? What I would say though, going back to your, I guess the first question is, how does this scale? The interesting answer that I always give is it doesn't at all, right? We've built a productized service, which is great. I can sell you, put you into the productized service. The productized service is going to work. I'm confident of that. But every 20 clients we add, we need a new team member. So that's another piece of headcount. That's another, layer of admin costs that goes in there. That's another person that we got to answer questions to, right? Like this becomes the other side of, owning a service-based company. There is a cost to every single client that you add, whether or not you already have the team, whether or not you don't need to hire somebody or add new software or anything. There's a hidden like operational admin cost that always comes into it, right? So I always tell people it's not scalable. What is scalable, though, is the thought process of how we took Pneuma from 0 to 3 million in 2 years. That's scalable. That's a process that I can take out of my brain and go put into company B, company C, company D, company E, company F. So you mentioned in the bio part, Pneuma Ventures. Mm-hmm. That is what Pneuma Ventures is built to do, right? Pneuma Media stumbled on something I think very unique. We scaled an agency, which is incredibly hard to do typically, to 3 million a year in under 2 years with people that have never owned or operated a business before, while keeping clients happy, while operating at a margin that's much higher than most other agencies will operate at. Kind of ask you the question of what gives. And, we could probably sit here and grow this agency to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 million. In many ways, I probably think it's going to get there anyway, even with or without me. But what the most interesting thing is, okay, if I can just tell people what I did and the steps I took and just repeat that process again, the Bill Belichick, Tom Brady playbook. What happens if I do this with 9 different companies, 10 different companies, right? I'm okay if Pneuma, I pour all my time into it and it gets to 9 million. But what if I had 10 other companies that were all at 3 million ARR with 10 individual founders or owners that all thought the same, or maybe had a similar thought process of how to run the agency? I think what we stumbled on in creating Pneuma was not a flaw in how to run a web and SEO agency or a flaw in the process for building websites and doing SEO campaigns. I think we found a flaw in how people run agency businesses in general. And taking that process and applying it to other businesses, I think has far more equity value, far more cash flow value than just putting it all into one thing. But I think it gives a lot of people more opportunities to work, have jobs at companies that actually work and provide value to their clients.
For sure. So one thing too on this, I think is important. I know from talking with you that you have been very strategic and very smart outsourcing, right? And you do it incredibly effectively. It's taught me a lot in terms of looking at projects outside of the scope of kind of what we do day to day. You've done it very well. I'm sure that's part of why your margins are higher than everybody else. But with that, there's kind of a fear of, hey, maybe this is another country. Maybe there's a language barrier. You've done a great job of that. I think it would be helpful for me, everybody, our audience to understand the do's and don'ts with that and what's worked.
Yeah. And I always start strong with this. 75% of our team's overseas. And if I could make it 90%, I'd make it 90%. I would put myself overseas if I could find somebody to replace me. There are so many reasons why. And I don't want to go down the whole political or like that whole side of things. But I think America is in trouble with the way that we build talent in this country, specifically even for what we do, web and SEO, ever since the start. And I didn't set out to essentially hire people overseas. And Pat, you said outsourcing. I think outsourcing gives a negative connotation because people think you throw a project at somebody somewhere else and you let them figure it out. We've built overseas teams, so we outsource to ourselves. But I think the biggest thing that gets people in trouble is that, you go and hire for the best people. That's what you always want to do. We're a remote company. I'll never have an office. If I do, something's gone terribly wrong. My office is my second bedroom. But that being said, I went out and looked for the best possible people. And I started on Upwork. I typed everything in and an unknowing, biased, judgmental 18-year-old, 19-year-old version of myself. It's like interesting, and this was back with actually hiring something for TEDx. I used to put in Upwork and I was like, only US, only US, only US. And we'd pay $30, $40, $50 an hour for some contract and get it done. And I'm like, oh, this is great. This is arbitrage. I'm making 100 and paying them 50 an hour. And then one day, whenever I started Pneuma, I needed somebody to do data analysis for us. And I was poking around for US and I was like, $225 an hour for Excel sheets? Like, that's ridiculous. I know how to do that, but I don't want to. Let me click all countries. And then I got a whole swath of people from Venezuela, $5, $6, $7, $8 an hour. Then I'm like, wait a second, they're way more qualified. Like unbiased, let's put resume to resume. This dude's got a data science degree, a data analysis degree. He's worked as a data analyst at a company for 12 years in the marketing industry. Like I am totally hiring this guy. And that broke it. His name's Adrian. Adrian's still with us on the data analysis side of things for the SEO team. I realized one, the costs are obviously in favor, but we'll set that aside for a second. The quality is so much better. Our quality of work went up overnight. And I know that seems so funky to most people who have lived in America that are, in many ways pro-America. Again, I think America's in trouble because I can outsource that same job or find somebody overseas to bring onto our team at a quarter of the cost at 2 or 3x the productivity and 2 or 3x the output. It's one of those weird things that I do not think will be around forever. I don't see it being around for the next, even 30, 40 years, because I think a global market's going to start to take over. But that's a really big portion of it. But, I'd say the other thing as well, 2 of the drivers of why we've gotten a 3 million ARR with high margins. One, it's because we have overseas talent. Instead of paying $10, I can pay $3 for double the work and double the output. Who doesn't want that deal, right? But because it's double the work and double the output, we get way better results. So I can charge higher and keep you longer and resell you to different client paths as well. And that's been a bigger arm for growth, is that 40 to 50% of our revenue now is expansion revenue. We closed you initially, we've expanded you onto larger packages. That is also unheard of because, again, most agencies suck. They're looking at the contract and they're saying, oh, the contract's up, I'm out, I'm gone, see ya. It happens with everybody. I think our annual churn right now is 11%. That's most agencies' monthly churn, which means they're flipping a client base in a year. We flip it every decade. So it puts us in a much better position. But I bring all the way back to overseas and just talent in other countries. If you're committed to remote work or committed to understanding how to make it work, I always say it's like playing a game on hard mode, because in the office, it's easier to get stuff done because I can walk down a hall and say, hey, where are you at on this thing? But I can't do that on a remote world, right? Issues become more prevalent. But if you can figure that out, it's one of the best investments ever. I think, again, companies go quicker, but let's even say that they're not even nearly as productive. Let's say they're 75% as productive. That has nothing against 75% less cost, right? So there's a whole world out there. At least for me, I really like hiring in Latin America. English is a very well-spoken language by them. They're on the same time zone, so you never run into time zone issues. In many ways, we've already talked about flying down to them or having them fly up to the States for get-together. So your team's pretty darn close in many ways. But I always give this analogy, and you two might laugh. In college, if you're a guy and you're in finance, you want to work on Wall Street. I don't know who made that a thing, but at least in my age group, it was like, I want to wear a blue suit and a tie, and I want to go into the office every day. And I want to be a guy in a TV show. In Latin America, they want to work for marketing agencies, because while all of us were running around Times Square and movies, everyone else sees all the advertisements behind it. And they're like, that is the coolest thing. I want to do that. So it's been extremely easy to hire. I could go put a job posting on and have somebody at the end of this call that's top tier. That's probably a quarter of the rate of what I could find in America.
So along the lines of the remote workforce, right? Because there's this, you open up.
I opened up a lot.
Right. Well, even if you open up a Wall Street Journal or you turn on CNBC, there's this debate of remote work versus in office, right? And I think you've touched on, for me personally, right? I grew up in just being in the office day in, day out. And like many, COVID forced us to be a little more remote. And what I found was I was far more efficient and effective at home. But what was lost was the camaraderie, right, that you're building with teammates. And sometimes even when you want to share ideas or kind of the ability to turn around and ask somebody a quick question. So I see that there's a balance there. How do you kind of capture the best of both worlds? You touched on it a little bit by saying, hey, in some cases, we might have the team come out here, we might go to them. But is that important to you to kind of create this, what you're building with your culture is to be able to share these ideas? I mean, how are you dealing with remote versus, again, kind of in office?
Yeah, you definitely lose something.
Mm-hmm.
This might sound odd as well, but I think it's harder for people who are used to in office.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a few summers in offices, even for internships, and a brief amount of time with an actual job. I'd say probably a year and a half combined in my life. I wasn't that used to it. It was pretty easy to pivot. But right now we have a lot of people that we're hiring out of college that have never seen anything other than that. And what I'm finding is that if you're not used to what in-office work is like, you do remote work. We still want the same things as people. This is more psychology, right? We want to have friends, we want to have friendships, we want to have camaraderie. it's been really interesting to watch how people just solve for that on their own. So we use Slack. I haven't touched on it. It's not really worth touching on, but if you're running a remote company, only use Slack. Don't use anything else. It's really kind of like a structured water cooler for an office, I would say. There are so many different ways to make that
a really good way of putting it.
It really is. And because you can have the different channels and things like that. But I don't create channels anymore. I think it's 7 different Slack workspaces now. It's chaos. But one day I get in and somebody had created the interesting channel just to share interesting things. And that really has been like the water cooler for us. Roger will toss in something that's cool. Colin will toss in something that's cool. We had the hail warning here. We have somebody in Denver and she took a screenshot and tossed it in. It was like, has any of you all ever seen baseball sized hail? Like, it's just a fun way to communicate. And what's funny is that none of them have ever seen in-office work. They don't know what they're doing is essentially what people are doing in the office aware around a water cooler or something like that. But I would say it's part tech, but and it sounds so odd, just leave it up to people, let them figure it out. Now we'll still have summits and get-togethers and things like that, but we do feedback once a quarter after our every third all hands as a team. And one of the things that we consistently get, and we actually got it a few weeks ago, we needed it again. This feels like the closest team I've ever been a part of, and I haven't met any of you. And they were like, this is the coolest but weirdest thing ever. And we consistently get that feedback. And I think a lot of it is because 1, we just honestly have great people, but 2, using Slack and really letting human nature kind of take over in a weird way is great. There's a little feature on Slack now called Huddle, and you just press a button and it essentially starts audio on the other person's screen. You can just jump in and jump out. I was looking at Huddle stats, which is a thing in Slack, and like 80% of the team use huddles for like a minute or 2 minutes. I think the average duration was like 2.5 minutes. I was like, whoa, that's cool. Like, I kind of dig that. Like, people they're jumping into each other's virtual offices. So a lot of those things that you mentioned that like, I can't pop in and can't do that. As tech has caught up, I'm actually finding that like, I can do all of those things. I think there's a whole world why some people will still prefer in person. And I think there's a lot of cases that you need it. But for a company like ours and what we're doing, it almost seems like a step back.
That's great. As an entrepreneur, and because we live in an age where information is so readily available, right? Do you find it easier to be an entrepreneur today versus, heck, maybe some of the mentors you've had and the stories they've shared? Do you feel like it's easier, A, because there's so much more information available, but B, there's been this change of attitude in sharing information amongst competitors. It's interesting because when the industries I've been in, it's always like you kind of hold everything back. You don't share, right? You've got the secret sauce. But then actually for me, it was the first time I interacted with breweries in Colorado. And I noticed there was a network amongst these breweries where they were sharing their trials and tribulations. And it made them more efficient, right, within an industry, and they took a larger market share, and it helped some up and coming entrepreneurs skip some of the mistakes that were made because others were leveraging their experience. Do you see that kind of in this day and age, and what you're doing is that there's more competition that's putting the guard down, being vulnerable, and having true conversations with one another?
Yeah, I would have never thought that was actually the case. Honestly, starting a business, I thought you had to keep everything close to chest. And 3 of the people I get the best ideas from, or 2 of the 3 could definitely be deemed as my competitors. And one of the 3 is kind of on the outskirts of being a competitor. And I give them all of our stuff as well. Literally, something just deeply important to our SEO process is what we call a QBR, quarterly business review. A competitor gave it to me. I turned around and gave them our SOP for writing a certain type of blog. Like, it is completely open door policy, which I think is very cool. I think that makes it more fun though. And I played college sports. I still play basketball and soccer quite a bit. I'm competitive. If everything's even scale on the education side of things, then I have a lot of fun because I'm like, okay, I can't put that as the argument against it. So my best bet is to over educate and then just be as competitive as possible and just sprint by you. So, in many ways, I'm happy to share because, again, coming back to our sales process, I'm going to share and you're not going to do anything with it. So if I can use that as an opportunity to get more details and more insight that I can use selfishly, I'm going to. So that is where I get a little competitive and fun. I love that the doors have been taken down because a lot of people do it as a networking thing. Oh, thanks so much for sending this over. I'm going to send it right away to the team. No, you're not. but I am, and I'm going to use it, and I'm going to use it to get right past you. So I've loved that aspect of it. I love that information is readily available as well. But I think the other thing that's really interesting, it comes back to the personal brand standpoint. Find somebody in 1970 that could consistently get in front of 40,000, 50,000 people and tell their story, tell their message. It's not happening at all. I can do that right now with my phone. And that is a game changer in itself that I think business gets a little bit easier because of that. Because again, when could you push a button and tell everybody that you want to buy from you, that you have a special offer on the table if they take, anything like that, right? Like I've just seems like such a hack that I even feel behind on it. Again, you guys have talked about I'm young. I feel like I'm 10 years behind on building a brand because there's kids younger than me with hundreds of thousands, right? But I really think that definitely makes things easier.
The thing I wrote down and the thing that stands out to me, and you said it, is execution. This information is available. It is there. You're sharing, but it still comes down to those who are going to execute and those who won't.
That's the thing, Dave. And I know from having worked with you, which is why I thought you'd be great for this show, is you execute. You're a visionary, no question, but you take action quickly, you respond. All this stuff you're saying is accurate, but that is so true. A lot of people talk, you do. How do you find the people that do that? Talk about execution.
Yeah, and I'm going to shout out Colin, my COO, and now partnered a couple businesses, partner in the Holdco, an absolute stand-up dude. He's like a heady individual in a good way. I can't always think of the word, but very logical, very thoughtful, which is a big reason why I hired him, because he's truly like an empath. He can read a client situation. And Pat, you've talked to him before.
Sure.
He has a very good sense of communication and how to get in that, which I like. But he sent me something a while back and he was like, if I throw something, and this is the writing speaking, like the screenshot he sent me, but if I throw something at someone's head, they duck. That's called a reflex, right? Like if you didn't duck, you'd be kind of weird because there's a brick coming at your head. And it was like in the same way, some people are born with it like a quality reflex. If it's not good enough, they're going to duck and fix it. Like, right. And I think part of it is hiring for that. And it's such a difficult thing to hire for. And I am not perfect at it by any means. I've made some swings and some big misses with that. But, I think a big part of it is finding those people that have similar values, especially with that execution side of things. Honestly, I love hiring people that are ex-athletes or ex something else. A lot of times I'll get resumes and transparently, I don't look at them much anymore. But even when I did not look at their like job stuff. I went straight down to the bottom where a lot of people put extracurricular, like, okay, what else did you do? Because anybody holds, like everyone for the most part can get a job. I can hold jobs. I can make it sound fancy. I'd made plenty of things sound pretty fancy on my resume when I was applying for jobs that were complete, just definitely an overextension of what I was doing. I go down to extracurriculars and I love when people are like, oh yeah, I had a job, but I ran this event. I ran this thing. I do this thing over here. I volunteer here. I love seeing that style of thing in resumes and in people. One, because it shows me that they just have more interest in just one thing, which I think is healthy. But two, it's a strong sense of execution. If I can have a job but execute on A, B, C, D, and E things as well, I think that's good. But the other thing that I don't hire for, but I definitely create as a value, and I hold to that value tightly, share before you're ready. So it's a book by the Lessonly CEO, Max Yoder. He probably won't listen to this, but if Kyle Lacey listens to this for some reason, I still love this book. He did it as like a marketing strategy to do account-based marketing, I believe, like out to these certain companies. But he was not going and marketing Pneuma, but I still read the book. And it talked about Lessonly's core value about how to do better work, or core values that make up the book, How to Do Better Work. And one of them was share before you're ready. And that's something that we've always put into motion, because if you give people a culture that it's okay to swing and miss, they will swing a whole lot more and they're going to hit a whole lot more home runs as well. So in a corporate environment, if I presented a deck that wasn't perfect, I'm in trouble. And that happened multiple different occasions. It wasn't cool to get early feedback. And even if people encouraged it, they would immediately shoot you down because it's not perfect, right? It's just a cool thing that people said. For us though, you can ask team members hypothetically, I get mad if things take too long. They're like, oh, I'm looking through it right now. I don't care if you're looking through it, send it. Like, let me look at it, make sure you're on the right trajectory, and we can go back to the drawing board. So I'd say that's a big part about execution. I think everyone's capable of execution. I think a lot of times they're scared about executing and missing because of the repercussions of what that's going to entail for their job, their job, their salary, anything like that, right? When you break down those molds and you're like, hey, I don't care if you whiff. I just want to see where you're up to so I can guide you in the right path. You create a tighter feedback loop and you can execute a whole heck of a lot quicker. So we have a lot of team members that came in that would not share their work, and we slowly had to move them into that. And now I have to ask them to go to someone else because they're hitting me up so much for feedback. Like that's when you have a culture on execution is, again, I think everyone can execute. I just think a lot of people, honestly, a lot of companies just have a terrible culture for execution. They want to get stuff done, but when somebody does something, they rip into them if it's done wrong.
And you're not stifling that creativity.
100%.
That's what stands out to me. I think that's another great observation that I hate to call it old school versus new school, but in a way it is, right? I mean, you're right. It was always like, hey, you can't admit your failure or your weaknesses. Whereas now, yes, let's just get past that. If the goal is here and we're all moving to the same goal, let's do it together. So by allowing them to move quickly, make mistakes, and course correct on their own, you're not stifling that creativity. And that's more of an advantage for you and your team, I imagine.
So Dave, there's another podcast that I really like a lot. It's called Founders. I can't remember the individual who does it, but he basically takes bios. We talked about it, David Ogilvy, advertising guy. But what has really kind of resonated with listening to that show and with the successful entrepreneurs that I've represented, you see, even though they could be completely different, bricks and mortars, tech, building websites, medical businesses, what have you, there's one commonality with the most successful ones, and is the willingness to do it now. And on this podcast, this guy was talking about David Ogilvy specifically and said he had a sign in his office that said, "Do it now." It's all about maximizing things quickly. I think you're really effective at that. And I think with your philosophy and culture of be willing to make a mistake, it doesn't have to be perfect. Progress over perfection is probably very helpful in that culture and in the strides that you've made.
Yeah, there's two things that I always think of when this comes to mind. One of them is a good friend of mine that I went to college with. His name was Hank. And I always saw Hank as somebody that was like on top of it, always. I never really dug into like how he managed things, but I was like, oh, that dude has good grades. He's on top of it. He's involved in a lot of stuff. Like he must just be rocking. So I asked him one day, I was like, hey, how are you on top of everything? And he was like, hey, talk to me tomorrow. I got a paper due like tonight. I'm like, whoa, that doesn't seem like Hank. But I was like, okay, I'll talk to you tomorrow. Talk to him tomorrow. I was like, hey, like real quick, like you ever get that paper done? He's like, oh yeah, I do that all the time. And I'm like, well, this is interesting. Like break it down. Why do you do it all the time? And his is a little bit of an opposite, but I still think it's an interesting thing. He was like, if a paper only takes 3 hours, I'm only spending 3 hours with it and I'll start it like 4 hours before. And I'm like, you don't get ahead of the curve. Like you don't start it a couple weeks early and like get good progress. And he was like, no, it only takes 3 hours. Like if it only takes 3 hours, I'm only spending 3 hours on it. I'm not going to go overboard. So that's always stuck with me in the sense of like, you'll hear a lot of people say, oh, I'll get it by the end of the week. No, end of day, end of hour. Like, let's just move up that timeline because this task only takes 5 minutes. You don't need the rest of the week to complete something that takes 5 minutes. So it's a little quick and not everybody, and that is our working culture today. Not everybody's tuned to it, but if you say you're going to get something done in the day, you just take time to do it. The other story that I think of a lot more though is Elon Musk. We all know who it is with the Boring Company. He wants to do the tunnel. And I don't even know the status of this tunnel, and maybe this isn't the perfect example now that I say it, but the start of it is a great example. They wanted to build a tunnel. He had the idea on, let's say, a Friday morning. And he was like, okay, like what's needed to make this tunnel happen? And, he's probably got a team of lawyers and regulators that are like, oh, we need to do 100 things. And he goes, okay, let's break ground tonight. And they're like, did you say tonight? And he's like, yeah. We're digging the tunnel tonight. Somehow or another, they got everything done and they started construction on the tunnel that night. Again, I don't know where the tunnel is, so it might not be the perfect example, but I always think of that because we hit these big problems in life and business and we're like, okay, this is going to be tough to do. Like I need to sit and think and like, no, just like start walking, start moving. I'm kind of a nerd. Maybe not like a book nerd, but I love reading about human psychology, and stress is one thing we've all felt before. And an interesting thing about stress that I started doing in college, when I felt stressed, I would get up and move, because when you move from the environment that you have stress in, your body naturally starts solving the problem because you're not in a cloud of stress. In many ways, I feel like that applies to business problems as well, and why I think I have a lean to execute, because I don't want to sit in a cloud of stress and a cloud of thoughts. Thinking is cool, doing is better. And I've always, again, maybe even Brian, back to the quantity versus quality. My best thinking happens when I'm doing, right? If I'm thinking about how to take a company to market the right way, I'm just going to start taking the company to market and figure out what sticks. So again, it kind of flips it on its head, but I always think of those two examples because, time and time again, I'll see other companies that need to get something done and they're like, oh, let's think on it.
You can kind of overthink it
You can
sometimes by not
overthink it.
diving in.
And then you're at the same point that Hank is 4 hours before the paper's due and you're doing it anyway. You might as well have just waited to that point and just done it. So there's different strokes for different folks, so to speak, but definitely one to think that like, executing is the best way to actually think through something. So we just start executing.
So Dave, one of the things I think we ask everybody, because being an entrepreneur has all kinds of demands. It's one of those things I think we all wrestle, never getting away from it, running our own businesses. You're a really active guy. You're a soccer player. How do you manage that? You still have a great life. Take the audience through that a little.
Yeah. If anybody knows me, I'm sitting here well, it's not my old MacBook. I've been using the same MacBook for a while. I just got a new one, but I will pour an entire day into that MacBook. No questions asked. I could work. And this isn't a pat on the back about a work ethic thing. I just enjoy what I do. I can pour myself into it. And if my to-do list is clear, I will find a problem to solve. That is not an issue for me. But one of the things I've learned, and it's the advice that people gave me early on as well. And, young entrepreneur, you ignore it, but you got to refill the gas tank and you got to create habits to refill the gas tank. And one of the things that has actually really helped is I have a screen blocker on my phone called Opal, and Opal will block things out prior to 7 a.m. and after 6 p.m. What it does after 6 p.m., it blocks Slack and email. So like you legitimately can't get a hold of me. So I have to go do other stuff. Prior to 7 a.m. or whatever, it also blocks Slack and email. And then throughout the day, actually, I don't think there's a moment in the day that it's not blocked, is social media. So it's on like a timer. I can access it, but I have to wait. It's very like primal, but it's incredible because then I like look at it, I'm like, I'm not waiting 30 seconds to get on Twitter, and I bounce off, which is exactly what I want. So part of it's been that has helped me create just like focus time. When I'm focused, I get more work done, which means I have a lot more time afterwards as well. But, I've learned that business, again, is a very competitive thing. It's in many ways like a sport to me. I think you can get really good at the game of business the way that you can get good at soccer, that you can get good at basketball. So, I played college sports, had a really good soccer career, played some basketball, had a terrible high school basketball coach and ended up quitting because of it. But, basketball comes around and it's one of those things that like I feel like I can consistently do and get better at. But the same thing with soccer and basketball. I didn't want to play for 24 hours. I really liked whenever I played soccer for 3 hours and that was it. And I went on to something else. So for me, I think a lot of business is about that balance because I have to come into work every day now. It's a lot different than when I was freelancing at the start. We have any given time, even including like very shallow part-time contractors to full-time people. There's like 40 to 45 people clocking in, even if it's small amount of hours, and clocking out, doing something for us on a weekly or monthly basis. That is a lot different than it just being me. So when I come to work, I have to be my best self because I have no idea what's going to get thrown at me any part of the day, right? So because of that, like I still try and work out heavy 2-3 times a week with a trainer. And actually I'll pause on that because I think it's a fun little snippet. I played college sports. I had workouts programmed for me for probably a decade. I know how to work out on my own. Getting a trainer was the best decision I've ever had because I was working out 1 to 2 times a week without a trainer. And when you go in and pay some money for a trainer, you're going to get held accountable. And, I'm kind of cheap. I don't want to waste the money. So I always go. So trainers are a great investment if you haven't already, but I do that and just find other ways to be competitive. I think the other thing too, I have multiple personalities in a positive way. I have the business David who, friends will tell you, I get locked in. I get very focused. I get very sharp. I get everything done. And we've talked about that on the execution side. But then I have, other versions where it's a lot more fun, just like let loose and just play basketball, play soccer, play a sport. Right. And I think it's really important for, maybe not all the time. Starting a company, it's tough because I poured every ounce in energy and still wasn't getting anywhere early on. But it's good to separate that out and give yourself some freedom to try new stuff. Because I think if you're tied up in a business every single second of every single day, it's going to burn you out quickly. And for me, the working out, the playing basketball, the playing soccer is nice to detach. But equally, I've picked people that, one, don't care what I do, honestly. But two, I don't even know if many of them know what I do. So I don't have to talk about business. Nobody's asking me about an angry client. They're like, oh yeah, you work today? Yeah, I did. Okay, let's play. Like, we got 2 20-minute halves. Let's go. Like, it's not even a topic of discussion. So it creates such a high level of separation that I come back really recharged the next day. So I always get on people that are like, oh yeah, I definitely separate, work and business. And I'm like, okay, like, what do you do? I work out. That's great. Who do you work out with? I work out with all my coworkers. And I'm like, oh, so you guys talk about business the whole time you're working out? And they're like, yeah. And then we go work after. And I'm like, well, that defeats the purpose. So for me, it's been really good. It's a complete change of scenery. It keeps me physically healthy, which I think keeps me mentally sharp. And those two things are really important, I think, for business.
Absolutely. And so one of the things about you too, and this is where I remember our first conversation, to give a little more context to it, I was doing some LinkedIn campaigns about selling your business, and you were a guy who downloaded the source. I was also at the time looking at doing a new website. We had a conversation. You go, yeah, I'm not really looking to sell right now, but by the way, are you looking at websites? And I'm in this quagmire of like, do I hire these guys? These guys? I get 100-page contracts from some of these groups that I can't even understand. And, I do contracts.
Yeah, how was my contract at first?
Yours was like, yours needed some work, right? Which we did. It was like a sentence, right?
It maybe two.
I loved. I'm like, well, I can't get screwed on this guy. And then later, as you know, we started working together and we improved it a fair bit. One of the things about that, I was shocked when I realized your age. And I was like, should I hire this guy? And then I go, yeah, I want somebody younger who knows so much more about this space than what I do, right? And it was a really good decision. You become a good friend, a great advisor on this kind of stuff, which leads me to, I think it's obvious your acumen and what you've done. It's incredibly impressive. You're only 25 years old. Where does this go from here? Are you going to sell this thing? I have no question there'll be some significant exit in your future, or I know you've got other business interests, you've got the investment arm. What's the David Riggs and Pneuma picture look like in 5 and 10 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. And one person I always reference how do I build my playbook? And I guess we go back to, when you find something successful, you don't change it. There's a guy running a company called Tiny Capital. His name's Andrew Wilkinson. I very briefly know him. I've chatted with him twice, let's say, some over email, some in person. But, I know about his business endeavors far more intensely. And his story is really interesting. He started out with an agency as well, a little bit of a different path, was doing some product work and things like that, and took that agency and said, wow, okay, I can buy and sell these businesses. They have inherent, equity value, business value. And he paired it up with what Warren Buffett always talks about: buy good businesses, hold them forever, let them cash flow. So he took his holding company public off the back of starting an agency. Remember how long ago, which is like an incredible feat. I think they're closing on $1 billion market cap. It's not small, off the back of a literal services agency. And I always found that story really, really cool because it was one of the few examples that I saw somebody start an agency, grow it, take cash flow and put it other places, and personally get out of the agency game before it ate him alive. Because I see a lot of people, even when I was started on LinkedIn, even close to 6 years ago, doing the same exact agency. And whether or not they really want to do that, that's up to them. But it was really interesting to watch Andrew take an agency, which everybody was like is a terrible business model, and take a whole holdco public off the back of it and off the back of the earnings from that. And it was kind of like in a weird way, a middle finger to how most people think of that. And I've always loved that story. And I'm watching it lifetime. I have holdings invested whenever it went public as well. But going all the way back to what I want to do something very similar, right? Agencies, transparently, like I don't want to respond to client tickets forever because I think there are other people that are better at it, and I can give that opportunity to other people. I've gotten really good at responding to them in the past 3 years. Don't know how much better I can get. I'm going to move my skill set and time to something else that I can improve upon, right? But I really liked his model of taking the agency and taking the learnings. He productized it as a way to run a business, his own version of how to run and scale a business and how to think about problems and solutions, and just dropped it into other businesses. And I'm saying it casual. He'd probably say it pretty casual as well, but like that's inherently what he did. He found great businesses, bought them, and he talks about it in a podcast that he's in. He goes, okay, we go down the marketing checklist. Do you have an email newsletter? No. Okay, we should do that. Are you running any type of Facebook ads? We should consider that. If not, do you have a nice website? If not, we should do that. And he just goes down the list and does very like small, very focused levers that he pulls, and he gets his money out, takes it, moves on to the next one. So he has somewhere around 30 companies, not to do a whole Andrew Wilkinson love affair, but that's definitely the methodology I want to go to. That I think Pneuma, again, and we kind of mentioned on that, I don't think we solved the problem of how to run an SEO agency. I think we solved the problem of how to run an agency. And in doing so, I learned a lot about business. I am much smarter and much quicker on my feet with business acumen than I was a year ago, even compared to 2, 3, 4 years ago as well. Using that in just an agency, I can totally do. And we continue to grow this thing, but I think it's far more fun. And at the end of the day, I've had a blast growing that business. Let's give other people the opportunity to do the same under somebody's guidance and mentorship that knows how to do it. So the goal is definitely take Pneuma, take the profits, take the distributions from it, and roll it into other versions of Pneuma. And I guess, and Pat, that's a recent acquisition we had is a link building company. So in SEO, you have something called link building. Essentially, we spent around $50,000 to $60,000 a year on links every single year. We just bought a company that will completely wipe that expense from our P&L and will also be able to sell against it because it's its own company as well. It's also a marketing agency. It's also an SEO. If it sounds familiar, it's because it is. We know exactly how to run an agency like that. So
That's awesome.
we're already in the process of taking that to market. And if you go back, we have a copywriting agency as well. Somebody that was a freelancer that we helped actually build her business and turned it into a full agency. And we took a slice of that as well and are helping her grow that. And I believe she actually just had a record month last month. So we're continuing to find these other similar but different agencies for multiple different reasons, right? And I continually reference the Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, but I think it's such a perfect analogy. It's not broke, don't fix it, right? And we know marketing agencies, we know service agencies, we know that style of business. I am not going to buy a moving company. I'm not going to buy a plumbing company. I'm not going to buy an HVAC company. I have no idea what to do. I don't even honestly know what HVAC stands for, right? Like I see a lot of people do something and pivot. And in the agency world, it's build an agency, sell it, and go start software. Not me, right? My competition are people that struggle to talk to their clients. The competition in software is no joke. There are some legitimate killers in that space. I'd rather play the game transparently on a little bit of an easier mode because I know I can dominate that style of business. So yeah, the goal is to really keep finding these competing or similar businesses. Our acquisition strategy isn't all that complicated either. We go down our P&L and I circle expense line items from vendors that I don't like paying all that much. And we go find a company that can replace it. We either try and buy the vendor, or we buy a version of the vendor that we can replace and slot in as well. And I think the other thing too, Pat, our relationship goes back a while. Since meeting you, we've talked a lot about web and SEO. We've talked about banking. We've talked about credit cards. We've talked about copywriting. We've talked about emails. We've talked about all sorts of different things, right? I think we've even talked about cars before. Once you build a relationship in a client services businesses, they will come back to you for everything. I refer my accountant an endless amount of times. I don't do accounting, but because I do marketing, web, and SEO, and I ask the right questions and like that guy might be up to something, I get the opportunity to refer and win that business. My goal is to create kind of a whole circle or suite of businesses. Maybe it's not marketed like this publicly, but if I acquire a customer at Pneuma, that customer can go over to Contributor Club. That company can then jump over to Laurel Leaf. That can go to PBI. That can go to A, B, and C different type of businesses, and essentially open up the door for us to really increase lifetime value. But I guess long story short, that's kind of the strategy is that, again, I think we solved how to run an agency business, at least are starting to solve a large majority of that. I definitely want to stay in this space, but use that to our advantage and really lean into it.
Makes a ton of sense.
And you feel like you're just getting started too, huh?
In a lot of ways, yeah. I feel like there's always stuff that we're learning. But another mentor of mine, he ran a similar agency, and he always had a good reference point for this because a few years ago, about a year ago, actually, I had an offer for Pneuma. I was like, "Hey, dude, should I sell this?" And he was like, "No." And I was like, well, I want that. Honestly, I was like, I want the money. He's like, you'll get the money if you just build a better business. And I was like, oh, well, this is interesting. Like, walk me through this. And at the time, we weren't really making that much compared to what we are now. And he was like, you may think you're good. You're not. He was like, get better. And if you get better and make more money and still want to sell it, then sell it. And I got to that point to where we were triple in size when that conversation happened. We have better percentage margins now than we did then. And I don't really have as much of a need to sell. But what I would say is that, I do have, I went to college. I would say that. So I went to Wabash. And whenever I left Wabash, I thought I was going to end up in a long career of MBAs and stuff like that. There's a world where maybe down the line it'd be fun to do, but I feel like I'm getting a lifetime MBA and taking a lot of distribution off the table to do so. That seems like a very good win-win. So yeah, really just using that to the advantage, thinking about the selling versus not selling and things like that. I'm really using it as a cheat code to learn. But to your point, definitely feel like we're just getting started because while we're good at the agency stuff, there's a whole other side of this that you have to understand with like a holding company and acquiring companies and things like that. Let's start talking about how to value companies. How do we read through P&Ls at scale? How do we do an actual due diligence, not just like check some things off of a piece of paper? How are we going to acquire the capital? Do we want to raise money? Do we not want to raise money? Do we want to go more private? Do we want to do a larger fund? And you both know this. We could ask those questions for the rest of the hour if we wanted to, and we'd still have more things to uncover. So that's what I'm really excited about is I think we've understood the business model really well. We have very thoughtful people. We've built very thoughtful operating procedures overall. And I know we don't like that. I don't like that word, but like guidelines to actually run the business, formulas to run the business. Now it's figuring out how can we scale that in a productized knowledge way and just put it into other companies. And I think that's going to be the next big challenge or opportunity.
Hey, when you do all that, just make sure you call me. So
Yeah.
it sounds like a fun ride to be a part of.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. I mean, like we said earlier, you're just getting started, and you've done so much already. You've learned so much. Candidly, it makes me slightly jealous. What was I would think back, what was I doing with my time when I was his age?
Fountain of youth,
Right?
and I be reincarnated, and I wish I had your knowledge now, but certainly 23 years ago.
Yeah, it's a great story. There are phenomenal lessons you've shared to the audience. What would you say if there was one piece of advice you can give to an entrepreneur who's just starting, or even a seasoned individual, right? That might be stuck at a number and can't get past from a revenue perspective. If there's one piece of advice you could give, what is it?
Yeah, I'm gonna cheat and give two. The one that I would actually give though, inputs over outputs. So lead versus lag is another way to think about it. But I see a lot of companies, if I asked them their goals, they would give me a revenue number. That's not a goal. That's honestly a pretty uninformed or worthless goal in my opinion. Not to rub anyone wrong, but okay, revenue is your goal. When do you know that you met that goal? Well, you know it once your timeline's done, but you can't do anything to change it then. You either hit it or you didn't. So the analogy I always use is losing weight. And I'll use myself because I'm trying to cut down and get a little bit leaner, right? If I want to be 190 in 3 months and I step on the scale in 3 months and I'm 194, there is nothing I can do. I'm done, right? I didn't track it. And that's just the output of what I should be doing or what I should be tracking, which are inputs. So what I always tell people is that whenever you start the company, a lot of people get very focused on outputs. Revenue is great. Yeah, it is. But like, how do you get to revenue? Let's back up a bit. I need to, and we'll use the old school analogy, even though it's not really worthwhile today. I need to make 100 cold calls in a month. Okay. How many is that a day? 20 work days in a month. I need to make 5 a day. Okay. What do you need to do to make 5 a day? Well, I need to carve out, let's say 30 minutes. Okay. How can you carve out 30 minutes? I need to make a calendar hold every single day on my calendar. Okay. Well, how are you going to hold to it? I need to make a bet with Johnny. If I don't do it, I owe him $5. There you go. There's your input goal, right? If I don't make calls, I got to pay Johnny $5. So I am obsessed with backing things all the way down to their smallest, easiest, most repetitive action. Because if you do that, you naturally are going to get started. Use this analogy with gym all the time. If you're struggling to go to a gym, the easiest thing you can do is lay out your workout attire in front of you. Like lay it out on your sink. You're going to see it at some point. You're going to put it on. And if you put it on, you'll go to the gym. Like, yeah, I know there's like somebody out there that knows logic. It's probably like, oh, that's a slippery slope fallacy. It is, but it works for me. So I'm going to selfishly keep doing it. But for me, there's all sorts of little things that I've set up like that and have it stacked onto different things. But I think the number one thing that I got too messed up with was trying to get to a revenue number early on. And you remember I got to 1 million, not realizing it's because I switched my model and switched to thinking. I stopped looking at revenue. Literally, I didn't even log into QuickBooks. I didn't know what was going on in there when I logged back in. All I did was focus on inputs. And for the longest time, my inputs were make a post on LinkedIn, message 20 people a day, check in on all client projects. I'm pretty sure that was like the 3 things that I did for almost a year. Never steered me wrong. And I think every business can be run and every job title within a business can be run with 3 or 4 very basic inputs every single day. Mine today is check in on all of my employees, make a LinkedIn post, and clear out inbox on Slack and email. That's it. I do those 3 things every single day. There are plenty of other things that fall underneath that, but those are the 3 actions that kind of have a ripple effect to everything else. So that's definitely the one that I always talk about. The second one, which I'll follow up with, run towards things that scare you. I know there's someone I'm actually thinking of right now. I won't name them, but an entrepreneur that really wants to grow their business, but is afraid of money, like petrified. And that's a common one. And I asked them, okay, like you're afraid of looking at your own QuickBooks. Why? I don't know how to read it. Why don't you know how to read it? Well, I've just never looked into finance. I thought it was stupid. Why do you think it was stupid? I don't know. And then they storm off, right? I'm not perfect at it, but if things scare me, I will take an hour or 2 and just rabbit hole down them because you're naturally scared of things you don't understand. If you understand something, you still might not like to do it, but at least you understand that you know enough to have that conversation. I see that all the time with people at P&L. They don't know how profitable their company is because they're afraid of opening up QuickBooks. And they're afraid of opening up QuickBooks because someone told them it was scary or they think companies like they just don't want to come in contact with it. So they run away. So that's the other thing I always give people is like, what's the dog that's not barking? What's the thing that's going to come grab you here in a month, 2 months, 3 months? Like what's the thing waiting behind the door that's going to get you if you don't get ahead of it? And managing that, asking yourself that. I used to ask myself a version of the question, if somebody else bought your company today, what would they do with it? Like what's the first thing out of the gate they would do? And that guided a lot of my actions early on in the business as well, because, well, if Pat bought my company, he'd probably go deal with that angry client. I should probably just go deal with that angry client and get it over with anyway. So using that as a framework of how to actually prioritize stuff worked pretty well also.
That's phenomenal. I think that's a great place to leave it. David Riggs, thank you for sharing your story. And thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Check this guy out.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want to find me, I'm sure we can link in show notes as well. If you go to LinkedIn and type in David W. Riggs, I will probably be one of the first that show up. If you go to Twitter, my handle is D. William Riggs. And then the website for the SEO agency that we talked primarily about is pneumallc.co. And then the holding company is pneumaventures.co.
And we'll make sure that we have it in the links that we'll be providing.
Thanks a lot, buddy.
David Riggs, everybody.
Thanks for having me on, guys.